let's start with the definition of tissues. Okay, so remember we talked about cells last time, and that's individual cell. And now we're talking about tissues, which is going to be cells working together as a related group, and that is what the definition of a tissue is. And the tissues are always closely associated cells that perform functions that are similar in their structure. Now, when we talk about tissues, there's only four kinds. So the tissues are only four kinds. Number one, the first one is called epithelial tissue. Mostly it's for covering. Number two, connective tissue, and it's usually for support. The third one is going to be the muscle tissue, which is for movement. And the last is going to be nervous tissue, which is going to be control. Underneath all this tissue, there's going to be different subclassification of the tissues that we actually know and will be studying. But when I ask you, what tissue are you seeing on the slide? Okay, you can only give me any of these four answers. So you cannot saying that it could be skeletal muscle. Because muscle tissue, it's a basic tissue, and the skeletal muscle is subclassification of that tissue. So we're going to start with your epithelium. So how does the epithelium differ from the other tissues? So it's generally covering the body, and also your epithelium also actually are glands. So the epithelium, they also are glands. So the function is for protection, absorption, secretion, ion transport, filtration, and as membranes, they actually form slippery surfaces. Now, what are the special characteristics of an epithelium? So this is going to actually differentiate it from other tissues. It has cellularity. So what does cellularity mean? So in the tissue that you're going to be looking at, you're going to see cells all over the place. There's nothing that is in between the cells, because each of the cells have a specialized contact. So each cells, their cell wall are adhered to each other by what we call specialized contacts. That's similar to your skin. It's made out of epithelium. So if I pull your skin on your arm, you won't see a crack there because those cells are actually joined together by special junctions. Now, there's another definition of epithelium. We call it polarity. What does polarity mean? So polarity means that there's actually a place in which the tissue has two surfaces. And the two surfaces is actually coming out from the basal surface, which is going to be here. And the other one is going to be the apical surface above that. So generally the basal surface is adhered to this place called the basal lamina. So epithelium always have what we call the basal lamina. That's the one that we actually have the tissue sit on. But the apical part, sometimes they're not just flat. They have these projections, in which the projections are actually your microvilli, which are extensions of the cell wall, and the cilia, which is elongated extension of the cell wall with proteins inside that allow it to produce some kind of a movement. And that's what a cilia is. So the microvilli is just extensions, and usually you see it on areas such as your digestive tract, because they will actually be the one that will increase the surface area for your food to be able to be absorbed at your small intestinal tract. So that is what polarity means. So an example of the cell-to-cell adhesion between the cell is going to be your tight junction. So the tight junction is literally just proteins interlocking on each other at the cell wall. So this is a cell wall of one cell and another cell wall of one cell. So the proteins literally would fit like a snap, and that will have the two walls joined together, like lock in its area. So there's not a lot of your intercellular space that is going to be between them. So there's going to be a small amount of space in between them, beside each other, are linked by this linker proteins. And that's the reason why they won't be able to be separated. And that's actually one of the characteristics of epithelium. Now, there's other things that allows it to actually join together. That is called your gap junctions. So this is a protein channel attached to another protein channel to the next cell. So they're literally just like a continuation of one tube. And this is called a connexin. And this is actually usually seen on the skin. It's very important in the skin, so the cells won't be able to hold away from each other. So this is called the adherence junction. It's made out of proteins and other proteins that is going to be connected to each other, we're making the cell wall and another cell wall adhere. And that is one of the characteristics. It has specialized contacts, but other characteristic that the epithelium has, it is supported by connective tissue. So it's sitting on this basal laminae, which is actually going to be located where the connective tissue is. Number 5, it says avascular. They call it a blood vessel. So the blood vessel does not go close to the epithelium. So the blood vessel gives its nutrients under the underlying connective tissue. They don't even actually penetrate the epithelial layer. So they actually just diffuse out their nutrients into the epithelium. But it is avascular but innervated because you got nerves that are connected into the cells of the epithelium. So that's actually the reason why sometimes when you scratch yourself, you actually feel the pain. And that's actually because of the innervation of the nerves on your tissue epithelium. And the last is going to be regeneration. So regeneration is an ability of the tissue in order to create new cells from the absence of another neighboring cell. For example, this cell died off. It actually died off. So now I got a gap between these two cells. So what's going to happen is this cell here, it's going to actually divide in order to fill up the gap and cover that space. And that's called regeneration. The problem with epithelium is when they regenerate without stimulus, like for example, this cell didn't die off. It's still alive. And if it keeps on regenerating, then you got now what we call cancer. It keeps on regenerating, proliferating, until you can feel it as a bump. And that's actually one of the problems about epithelium. They are usually associated with what we call carcinoma. All right, so now we actually talk about the basal lamina, which is going to be the support underneath the epithelium. It's this non-cellular supporting sheet between the epithelium and the connective tissue D to it. We call it a basal lamina. It consists of proteins that are secreted by the epithelial cells. So it's not connective tissues. We call it a basal lamina. Now the function of this features of the basal lamina, it also acts as a selective filter. It acts as a scaffolding along the regenerating epithelial tissue. And the basal lamina, together with the reticular fibers of the connective tissue, together they're actually called the basement membrane. So if you take a look at the picture again, the reticular fibers, which is located with the connective tissue layer. So if you combine the reticular fibers of the connective tissue together with the basal lamina, the partnership is called the basement membrane. But if it's just an epithelium, usually they just sit on top of what we call the basal lamina. The epithelium has different shapes. It also has different number of layers. So that's going to be the subclassification of an epithelium. So the first type of epithelium is going to be epithelium that has one layer only, and that is going to be called simple. Now we're going to add a description of that based on your shape. So it could be simple with a flattened shape called squamous, simple with a square shape of epithelium called cuboidal, or simple with an elongated tall shape called columnar. So we can actually have simple squamous, simple cuboidal, simple columnar. Best definition, what is the shape of the squamous? It is actually wider than tall. So you see it on the side view, flattened. It is flat and with a flat nucleus. If you see it on the top view, you can actually see it like they're just like cornflakes from the top view. The other is going to be cuboidal. So the complete definition of cuboidal is as wide and as tall. Now, if you notice, it looks like a square on side view, and the nucleus is round. The next is going to be columnar. So the best definition is that for that columnar is going to be taller than wide. So that's what a columnar epithelium is. And if you notice, this the nucleus is elongated upward. Okay. Sometimes we actually base the shape based onto the shape also of the nucleus, because sometimes on your microscope you won't be able to discern the boundaries of one cell wall to another cell wall. Stratified is more than one layer. That's called stratified epithelium. So you can have the basic differences of the shape: stratified squamous, stratified cuboidal, and stratified columnar. So now we know the different types or classifications of epithelium based on the layers and the shape. First one is going to be simple squamous epithelium. So that is flattened, one layered cell. Flattened, made out of squamous epithelium, one layer. And this is usually seen at the alveoli of the lung. Alveoli is the smallest sac located in the lung. When you actually get what you call a slide, it will look like this. Each one of them is a sac of alveoli. So if you take a look at this cavity here, all the lining of the cavity is simple squamous epithelium. I can see this, the nucleus there for each of the cells. So that's going to be what it looks like. It's one layered, flattened celled epithelium, because remember, when you say epithelium, you've got cell, 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 cell all over the place, nothing in between. So these are the cells that lines this sac. So the next one, if I give you the slide here, and I'm pointing at this specimen right here. So I'm going to be asking you what tissue is here. Since it is made out of cells, cell, 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 isn't that the characteristic of an epithelium? So it's actually made out of cell that lines this tube. This is the lumen of the tube. And within that lumen of tube, there's urine passing through that lumen of tube, because this example is going to be called the kidney tubules. So when you see a tissue like this, okay, you know it's epithelium because it's cell, 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 cell side by side. And you know it's only one layer that wraps that opening. So I'm going to call it simple. And the shape of the cell is as wide and as tall, basing it from the nuclei here. So that is going to be simple cuboidal epithelium. And the next question is, give me an example where you see this. And your answer is going to be kidney tubules. Okay. So next, when we finish with squamous, we have cuboidal. Now we're going to have columnar. So this is seen on your digestive. This is called simple, one-layered, columnar, elongated epithelium that lines the digestive tract. So this example is actually a digestive tract of probably a mice. So you see that it has a lumen, a cavity, and these are the walls of your intestinal tract. That's the reason why you can actually see it very small. Now, if you also notice the tips of that epithelium, they have this shadow on the tip. I got shadows on the tip, and the reason why it has shadows is because that is where the microvilli is located at. Microvilli increases the absorptive surface of a cell, and that's the reason why it's very important in the intestinal tract, because they actually need a little bit of increase in surface area, so they actually produce a lot of those extensions at the apical portion of the cell. So now you have food passing by here. So the carbohydrates was converted into your glucose. That glucose needs to go in to the cell. So I'm going to use this as an example, even though I don't see a nucleus, because sometimes when you cut it, you don't really get it on the center, you get it on the side. So this is going to be glucose coming in to be absorbed by this simple columnar epithelium. And then it's brought into the cell. Then after that is going to be given into the blood vessel. This is a special type of epithelium. We call it pseudostratified. What does pseudostratified mean? Pseudostratified means it's falsely layered. It's not really layered, but the way the cell paths are compressed to each other, it looks like there's multiple areas where you see the nuclei all over the place. So you see the nuclei here, one layer of nuclei, another layer of nuclei. Sometimes you see a little bit of this nuclei here. So it means that it is your epithelium that has your single layer, but it looks like it's multiple layers. So how do you have that on the slide? It looks more than one layer, because I see 2 to 3 levels of the nucleus. So the reason for that is because if you take a look at the cells that are located here, this is coming out from the respiratory tract. So if you look at the cells, they're just one-layered cells, except that they would actually squeeze in each other like pizza pies. This is one of the cell that lines this tract, which is going to be the trachea. Inside there is going to be this cell called pseudostratified. Another cell would fit, and that's going to be triangular in shape. Another fits, another fits, another fits. Now, since we have a lot of those cells fitting each other, now the cells has only one layer. It looks like it's 2 layers because the nucleus that are located at your cell, they usually occupy the widest portion of the cell. So the nucleus here, and there's another nucleus, and the second cell is attached, and that's your nucleus. Then nucleus, 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 nucleus. So when you think about it, okay, it looks like it is more than one layer of nucleus. But in reality, it is only one layer. So the place that you'll find this is going to be the trachea. Now, the stratified type is 2 or more layers of cells. Okay, that's your stratified type. So we generate from the below at the bottom, and the major role is protection. And the named shape of that layer is according to the shape of the cells located at the top layer. the apical layer. So we have the stratified now, okay? And the first one is going to be stratified squamous epithelium, and that's located at the skin. Okay, so they got two kinds of this. I got a stratified squamous keratinized and a stratified squamous non-keratinized. So the keratinized is the epidermis, and it has a protective protein called keratin that makes your skin rough. It's waterproof, and the surface cells are dead and full of keratin. So they're going to be hard to actually peel it off. All right, next we have the one that's non-keratinized. It means that there's some moisture lining of the area of this simple squamous epithelium. And if you go and look at the top portion of the layered portion of the stratified squamous epithelium, you can actually still see a DNA. And that example is going to be this one. So this is stratified squamous epithelium non-keratinized. Why do I know it's non-keratinized? Because the top layer, they're flattened on the top layer, but the top layer still has DNAs. So you can still see the DNA on top. Same thing as this. This is your cross-sectional cut, and from here to here, all the ones that I'm pointing at, that is called your epithelium. And whatever is happening in the bottom, that is going to be connective tissue. This is not epithelium. So the stratified keratinized. So the one that says keratinized, the top layer of the cells are dead cells. That means they're flaking off. So here, it's not still dead cells. So they actually still have nucleus onto that cell on top. They're still living cells. Now, when you actually see this epithelium, and you could think always about DNA. Because remember, when we want to get DNA from you, we scrape off the inner part of your cheek. So the example of non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium is going to be the mouth, the esophagus. Next, we're going to take a look at stratified cuboidal. Again, this is going to be usually seen located at your ducts of the SMS. The duct of the SMS. So what are they? The duct of the salivary gland, the duct of the mammary gland, and the duct of the sweat gland. Those ducts have two layers of epithelium on top of each other, and that is going to be this one. It's going to be about two epithelium on top. So we still call it stratified cuboidal epithelium, okay? Because what happened here is that this actually gives you the epithelium that looks like a duct of the glands. So that's the reason why I put it as the duct of the SMS. So you can actually see this is the duct of the SMS. You have your stratified columnar, and it is rare in his body, okay, and mostly you would associate that with the male urethra. So the male urethra, the opening up to the outside, that is stratified columnar epithelium. So how does it look like? So you see that the layers, 2 or 3 layers, but the top layer is elongated like a column. But remember, when it's a normal cell, such as your stratified squamous epithelium, you notice that the top layer of the cells are squashed because it keeps on pushing the old layer out. So the cells on top is going to be dead. An example of stratified columnar is the male urethra. So the transitional epithelium, they're layered. But if you take a look at the cells, the cells are on the bottom is smaller than the one on top. Okay, they're rounder, and that actually describes what a transitional epithelium looks like. You can actually see here, there's a big cell on top like mushrooms. The cells here are actually trying to reproduce. Okay, so that's an example of transitional, bladder, and your urethra. The connective tissue is a different kind of tissue. The 4 types is going to be your CCBB, okay, connective tissue proper, the cartilage, bone tissue, and blood. So those are the 4 types of your connective tissue. So we're going to go and take a look at this picture. Remember, the connective tissue starts out from mesenchyme. Mesenchyme is like a stem cell, but this mesenchyme is literally the one that will make up your connective tissue. So they can either make what you call connective tissue proper, and they can actually make cartilage, and they can have bone, and they can have blood. So they came from mesenchyme, and then after that, they're going to actually create what you call your cells called blasts, the immature cells. Fibroblasts for the connective tissue proper, chondroblasts for the cartilage, and osteoblasts for the bone, and a hematopoietic stem cell. So you actually produce what you have blood cells. So the basics of your connective tissue is it has a matrix. So when you say a matrix, it has spaces in between. Unlike the epithelium is cell connected to each other. There's none of a space in between them. But when you talk about connective tissue, you're going to have a matrix. So the matrix means a space. And usually that matrix has what you call your water. So it has water in between it. Now, the loose connective tissue and the dense connective tissue are generally the two types of your connective tissue proper. So that's the first one that we're going to be looking at. When you say loose, the cells are all over space in between each other. So in the middle is just matrix. Aside from that, you're going to see fibers that are located in between the spaces, and that is what we call loose connective tissue. Now, when you say dense connective tissue, the cells are spaced out from each other, but in between them are actually just a lot of the fibers that are located in that tissue. So that is going to be dense connective tissue. That's why we call it dense, because it's actually a lot of the fibers that are in between the matrix. So the first one is going to be loose areolar. We're going to look at that. So the types of loose areolar is going to be loose areolar, loose reticular, and loose adipose. So call it LARA to make it easier for your brain to memorize. So the loose areolar, loose reticular, and loose adipose, that is called the loose connective tissue. And then the other one is called dense. It's dense irregular, dense regular, and dense elastic. So you call it DIR. So these are the different kinds of connective tissue proper. Sometimes I call it CTP, connective tissue proper. So let's take a look at each one of them. The alveolar connective tissue, loose areolar, they call it the model connective tissue. So because remember, the connective tissue has fibers, and all three fibers are seen at the areolar connective tissue. All three of the fibers. The three fibers are called reticular, elastic, and collagen fibers. They're usually located at the areolar connective tissue. Some of the tissue does not have elastic fibers, so you only have probably collagen. So that's the reason why the areola is actually an example of a model connective tissue. You have the three fibers there. They usually are located underneath epithelial tissue. So let's take a look at an example of that tissue. I'm at the areolar connective tissue, and we got the three fibers within that tissue. So if I look at this slide, and if you notice that this slide is, I got a nucleus here, so that's a cell, and I got a nucleus here, so that would be a cell. So the cells are spaced apart. In between the cells are what we call the matrix. So this is called matrix. It's a space between the tissue. Now inside that matrix, you see, I can actually see two kinds of fibers here. So the fibers that are thin, elongated, these are called your elastic fibers. They're elongated and thin, they're called elastic fibers. Fibers are proteins. And then the one that's thick, and you see that it's actually stained red. Thick fibers, that will be the collagen fibers. And you usually see this type of areolar connective tissue, usually you see it underneath epithelium, or they wrap and cushion organs. That's areolar connective tissue. So that's actually where you would see it. So this is going to be areolar. So that's your example. Now, to familiarize yourself with this slide, if you actually take a look at the slide, if you see something, because this will be the same slide, the same picture on any slide that you're going to be able to look at. It looks like the spider web of the corner of your house. That is what the areolar connective tissue looks like. So if you see it on the slide, this is how they would actually be. Look, so we finished with loose areolar. Now I'm going to jump to loose reticular. Now I'm at loose reticular. So what does loose reticular have? So the word is reticular, so they have a lot of these reticular fibers. So you got a lot of these cells all over the place. But there's still a matrix here. There's a space in between them. You just have a lot of those cells. Now, mostly they're white blood cells. And the fibers that is associated with the reticular connective tissue is actually reticular fibers. So the thick, dark stained fibers, those are what you call reticular. It looks like crabs. They're actually sharp edges and they're fibers, and that is what we call reticular fibers. Now, if you take a look at this and you see a lot of those dark stained fibers, that is reticular. So your answer to this kind of tissue is loose reticular connective tissue, which is a kind of your, a type of your connective tissue proper. The example is going to be the spleen. So it's going to be an example. It's going to be the spleen. So now I'm going to go into my adipose now. Okay, I'm going back because the reason why I jumped, because I have my mnemonics called LADA. And the last part is adipose. So I'm going to go backward, and this is what an adipose tissue looks like. Usually you see it underneath the skin called the hypodermis, and the fats you actually see and within the breast, those are actually fats of the adipose tissue. So what does the cell look like? Each of this cell, you got a matrix, you got a space anyway among the cells. But the cell becomes so big that it's not a normal looking cell anymore. So this is a normal looking cell. So the cell is about 50 times bigger than a normal looking cell. The reason why they're actually 50 times bigger, because what they have inside here is called fat droplet. So the fat droplets are actually the fats that you digested and you ate, okay? Absorbed into the blood, but you never use those fat droplets yet, the lipids, because you got carbohydrates. So the body will intentionally store it at the hypodermis, the bottom of the skin. So this is what it looks like. It's a lot of fat stored inside in vesicles. And if you notice that the nuclei is pushed to the side, the nuclei is pushed to the side here. But this is one single cell. So inside that is going to be fat droplets. So if you take a look at this, it's like ghost cells, adipose. So I'm finished with my loose, and I'm now going to my dense. The first one is dense, irregular. So if you take a look at the tissue again, dense, irregular, you have a cell here, and those are the fibroblasts. Fibroblasts are the one that creates it actually is the one that creates your fibers. Your collagen fibers, your elastic fibers, and your reticular fibers. They're the one that creates it, the fibroblast. Now, I got a space here, my matrix, spaces. That's the reason why that's a characteristic of connective tissue. You got a matrix. Within that matrix are thick, pink-stained proteins. These thick-stained proteins are your collagen. So you have a lot of those. So it actually exhibits strength. So it provides strength onto that tissue. And that's the reason why an example of the dense irregular is the fibrous joint capsule. The fibrous joint capsule is going to be an example of your dense irregular connective tissue. So watch out for the word irregular. That means that the collagen fibers are actually going opposite ways all over the place. They're not directed into one direction. So it has strength, but not as strong as the next one going to be called dense regular connective tissue. So the dense regular connective tissue, you'd see that I have a cell here called fibroblasts, and fibroblasts, and I got a space there called your matrix. There's actually still spaces there. But if you notice that the pink stained structure inside, they're actually going in the same direction, just like a rope. So when you go in the same direction, there's a lot of these collagen fibers, then it exhibits strength stronger than your dense irregular. And that's the reason why an example for your dense regular is tendons and ligaments. Ligaments connects bone to bone. Tendon connects muscle to bone. Okay, so that's going to be the short definition of what is going to be a tendon and ligament. So this is what it looks like for dense regular. And last, okay, remember the last one is going to be dense elastic. And this is what it looks like, okay? So it's wrapped around circular in a aorta or a blood vessel. It's on the wall of the aorta. And if you take a look at it, there's still matrix in between them, except that collagen fibers are there. You can actually see collagen fibers are pink stained, but the dark stained one is called elastic fibers. Because remember, you need a certain portion of elasticity on your aorta, because when the left ventricle pumps blood, it's going to squeeze it out into the aorta. And you want the aorta to be able to adjust. That's the reason why elastic connective tissue is very important for the blood vessel aorta. So that's an example. All right, and then I finish with my dense. So in summary, my loose is made out of your areolar. You can imagine what it looks like, spider webs on the corner of your house. Then my reticular, and you see a lot of reticular fibers, crab-like looking fibers, and that's example is going to be the spleen. And then we have the adipose, which is large cells with fatty fats that are stored inside the cell, and that's your adipose. Then I got my dense irregular. It has a lot of collagen on the matrix, but the collagen are not in the same sequence as the other collagen fibers. They actually are going all over the place. Dense regular one, in which the fibers are going the same direction. That's what it looks like. They're going the same direction. And that's the reason why the examples is ligamental tendon. And the last one is dense elastic connective tissue. A lot of elastic fibers, there's still collagen in there, and that its location is going to be the aorta. All right, so I'm finished with my connective tissue, and then I'm going to go and move into now cartilage. Cartilage is still connective tissue. So it's a flexible tissue instead of a space, fluid-filled space of the with some kind of gel, but it still has 80% of water, but it has some kind of a hardened gel in the matrix. The living cell that you will see in that matrix is going to be called chondrocyte. Remember, the living cell you see on your connective tissue proper was actually your fibroblasts. So now we're going to go and take a look at the types. My type is HEF. HEF. Hyaline, elastic, and fibrocartilage. So I want to actually take a look at it, differentiate it from different types, because remember, the exam is going to be all about, this is a slide, and tell me what tissue it is, what specific tissue, and what are the examples of that tissue. So this is hyaline cartilage. So if you take a look at the matrix is actually has an amorphous but firm matrix. It has collagen fibers, but collagen fibers are actually just dispersed among each other, and that actually gives the strength of this cartilage, together with all the other things that are in there that will help the strength, and that is going to be the matrix, 80% water still, but you still have a lot of those, the solid matrix in there. So this is gel. Hyaline. Example. So this is what it looks like. Okay, so I associate this, if I visually see it, I look at it like the sea. A nice clean C. Okay, that's going to be your matrix. And this part here are cavities called lacuna. And inside there are living cells. So they're the one that is called your chondrocyte. It's a living cell. So this is what it looks like on hyaline cartilage. So if you consider using this as a tool to remember, so this looks like the Catalina Beach. This looks like Catalina Beach. Nice clean water with yachts floating onto that surface of the sea. So this is how you should actually remember it, by looking at it as if it was the beach called Catalina Beach. An example is costal cartilage, the cartilage that connects the sternum to the bone. That's going to be your costal cartilages. Next, after the hyaline, we go to elastic fibers. Okay, it's the same thing. It looks like a C. Only problem is that sea has a lot of seaweeds. And what are those seaweeds? Those seaweeds are actually called elastic fibers. And there's a lot of them. So that when you pull your pinna of your ear to the front and release it, it actually goes back to its normal position. So that's a location called external ear pinna. And then epiglottis also inside your throat. So what kind of beach do you think this looks like? I see boats floating in there. I see a lot of seaweeds. I'm pretty sure it's Santa Monica Beach. So just remember, the main thing about studying your histology is to be able to identify them when I give it to you on your monitor. Okay, and the last of the cartilages is called fibrocartilage. An example is the cartilage between the vertebrae called intervertebral discs. These are the ones that actually protect two vertebrae from smashing against each other. Sometimes they produce what we call protrusion or the sac. So there's a sac coming out here, and that is called the herniated disc. That's called a herniated disc. Okay, so how does it look on the slide? Okay, again, I see my boats. I see my yachts. So the boats and the yachts, inside there is going to be a yacht, and that's actually made out of your chondrocyte cell inside with a lot of collagen fibers outside the matrix. So you got a lot of this collagen fibers. This stained blue, but they're collagen. Now, how do I associate that with what kind of a beach? That will be Long Beach, because you got a lot of ships passing through that corridor, and they actually have a lot of the gas that will flow. And these are actually the gasoline that probably that ship was moving on through sea. So it's always associated with a beach in order for you to understand and know how it actually is looking in a slide. So that's your fiber cartilage. It's the last one. So again, an example of hiding cartilage is going to be the trachea, the rings of the trachea, or the costal cartilages. It connects the ribs to the sternum. And then the other one, and if you actually see the slide, it looks like Catalina Beach, feather clear, no seaweeds. And then the other one is called elastic cartilage. And the majority of the fibers are actually elastic fibers, but there's still collagen there. So that is going to be fibrocartilage. And you would notice on the slide, it looks like people are still going to the waters and riding the yachts. Okay, but the collagen fibers are there, so it actually strengthens that tissue. An example is your intervertebral disc, the pubic symphysis, and the disc of the knee joint. So that's where the fibrocartilages are. So remember, you got to memorize the picture also. Now, the bone tissue, it has what you call osteoblasts and osteocytes located there, and the mature cells are called osteocytes. They live in lacunae. And then the osteoblasts, they secrete collagen fibers and matrix. Okay, that's what the osteoblast does. And this is how it should look like on bone. So this is what a bone tissue looks like, and you should not make a mistake in identifying here. It looks like 3 rings. And then within the 3 rings are lamellae. So these are called lamellae, the ridges that goes around. The lamellae sometimes have holes. Say this is a lamellae, and this is a hole. Okay, the lamellae, and you call that hole lacuna, and since it's a bone, you call it osteocyte. So that's going to be lacuna and osteocytes located at the lacuna. So you finish with bone tissue. The last one is going to be blood. So this is what a blood is. Okay, you got cells interspersed with plasma fluid. Matrix is a reason why they call it a matrix, a connective tissue, because there's presence of a matrix. So in the blood, what do you think is a matrix here? So your matrix is going to be the plasma. The fluid portion of the blood is your matrix. So an example here is blood located in your blood vessel. So that finishes up your connective tissue. So there's 3 kinds of muscle tissue. The first one is called skeletal. So skeletal muscle tissue is striated. You can actually see the striations on that tissue, and it's also voluntary. So those are the muscles that actually move your body, and they actually are controlled by you, voluntary. The cardiac muscle, it is also striated. The cardiac muscle is also striated, but that is involuntary. You don't control that. It's going to be involuntary. Next, the last one of the muscle, that's called smooth muscle tissue. So smooth muscle tissue is actually a muscle tissue that's it's like squamous, elongated. So this is going to be what it looks like for a skeletal muscle first. So you got an elongated cell. Every cell is elongated from origin to insertion of the muscle bundle. So that's the reason why instead of calling it a cell, we call it a muscle fiber. Elongated, long. So one of the muscle fibers is from here to here. All right, so how does the skeletal muscle look like? It looks like the scales of a fish. Okay, but it's elongated, and you got a lot of the striations here, perpendicular striations moving up and down. That is called the striations. Then the skeletal muscle is multinucleated. It has a lot of nucleus, and the nucleus is usually located this side because there's a lot of functioning structures within that skeletal muscle tissue. Now, this is cardiac muscle. You see striations, okay? You see those lines, except that there's one other thing. There's a thickened line in between muscle. That is called intercalated disc. So this tells you that the cardiac muscle is not an elongated muscle. It's actually fragments of muscle. So if this is a cardiac muscle, another cardiac muscle, and then another cardiac muscle attached to it, and another one attached, and it grows some more branches. So there are fragments of cells called cardiac muscles. So this is one cardiac muscle cell. And then this is another cardiac muscle cell. So they're connected to each of the cardiac muscle cell is located at the intercalated disc. That's what they actually are, putting back the cardiac muscles. They're connecting cardiac muscles. They're not elongated similar to the skeletal muscle. So the way they actually are connected, we call it the intercalated disc. An example is going to be the heart. Now this is smooth muscle. It's hard to really display smooth muscle on the slide, but this is how it looks like on the schematic diagram. Okay, and each of these are your muscles that are contractile. And the last, after the muscle, it is now your nervous tissue. So nervous tissue, it's made out of neurons. There's supporting cells there. But the basic identification is to look for a neuron. If the sample is from the brain, spinal cord, and nerves, be able to see a neuron. And the picture of that neuron is going to be like this. So what are neurons? Neurons are actually darkly stained, triangular shaped cells. I know this is a cell because I see a lightened portion in the middle, and that's going to be the nucleolus. That would identify it as a nervous tissue. So this is what a neuron looks like. You got an axon connected to the axon, okay, and you have a cell body here, and then you got dendrites. So stimulation comes from the dendrites, either from another neuron, and then dendrites carry that information down into the cell body. That is called action potential. And then from there it goes into the axon, travels down to the bottom, and it will then open up any of the things that that the neuron would actually need to do, which is synapse, release of neurotransmitter. So this is what it would look like. Triangular shaped cells with whips that are associated with that shaped cell. All right, so that actually finish up our tissue.